Hello students. Today we will begin with the discussion of our last lecture. Discussion of lesson number 2, The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khushwant Singh. So let us begin with the discussion of the remaining part of this chapter. To her, music had lewd associations. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars, and not meant for gentlefolk. To her, music had lewd associations. In these lines, the writer tells us about the disliking of his grandmother for the subject of music. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars and not meant for gentlefolk. His grandmother felt that music was the special right, or music was a subject which was mainly meant for the harlots. Harlots means prostitutes and beggars, and it was not meant for the gentlefolk, means the common people. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She rarely talked to me after that. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She means his grandmother didn't express her views regarding the subject, but she remained silent, and her silence meant her disapproval for the subject of music. She rarely talked to me after that. When I went up to the university, I was given a room of my own. The common link of our friendship was snapped. When the writer went up to university for the higher education, he was given a room of his own, and the common link of friendship between him and his grandmother snapped means broken. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. She accepted her seclusion means she uh, had a very little contact with other people of the family after that. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel, spinning and reciting prayers. For the whole day, she sat by her wheel, spinning and reciting prayers. Only in the afternoon, she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda breaking the bread into little bits, bits means pieces, hundreds of little birds collected round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirping. When she used to feed the sparrows in her house, thousands of sparrows collected around her and used to chirp around her. Some came and perched on her legs, others on her shoulders. Perched means some came and perched on her legs. Some means some sparrows came and perched. Perched means sat or rest on her legs, others on her shoulders. Some even sat on her head. She smiled, but never shooed them away. She smiled on at those sparrows, but never uh, make them afraid of her. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her when she used to feed the sparrows in the veranda of her house. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, when I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. I would be away for 5 years, and at her age, one could never tell, but my grandmother could. She was not even sentimental. Here, the writer tells us that when he decided to go abroad for further studies, he thought that his grandmother would be upset uh, for his going to abroad, but it was not like that. She was not even sentimental. She didn't get upset. She came to leave me at the railway station. but did not talk or show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayers. Her mind was lost in prayer. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. She came to leave His grandmother came to leave him at the railway station, but she did not talk or show any emotion for him. Her lips moved constantly in prayers, and her mind was also lost in saying prayers in front of the God. Her fingers were busy in telling the beads of her rosary, means she kept praying continuously at the time of leaving him at the railway station to go abroad. Silently, she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of any physical contact between us. His grandmother kissed him on his forehead, and after leaving the railway station, he remembered the moist imprint of the kissing of his grandmother on his forehead. He felt as if that was the last physical contact between him and his grandmother. But that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. But it was not like that. Even after 5 years, when he came back from abroad, his grandmother met him at the railway station. She did not look a day older, she looked same. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayer. When she uh, clasped means she embraced him in his arms. He could clearly hear her reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. Even on the first day of my arrival, even on the very first day of the arrival of author to his home, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. Frivolous means funny, amusing. While at the time of feeding the sparrows, his grandmother used to rebuke those sparrows in a very amusing manner. In the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. In the evening, on that very day in the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. She collected all the women from the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. For several hours, she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming of the warriors. For several hours, she thumped the sagging skins. Sagging here means bent down in the middle due to pressure. She thumped the on the drum and sang so many songs of the homecoming of the warriors. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. That was the first time since I had known her that she didn't pray. It was the first time when he noticed that his grandmother did not pray. The next morning, she was taken ill. It was mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. The next morning, she was taken ill. It was mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the first chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. So, uh, before dying, she prayed in front of God because she didn't want to waste any more talking to all of them. We protested, but she ignored our protest. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads. While she was lying on her bed, she kept praying and telling the beads of her rosary. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. Even before they could suspect of her dying, her lips stopped moving and the rosary on which she was telling the beads fell from her lifeless fingers. A peaceful pallor spread on her face, and we knew that she was dead. A type of paleness or yellowish color spread on the face of his grandmother, and they knew that she was no more. We lifted her off the bed and, as is customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. After a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. Here, the writer tells us that they lifted his grandmother off the bed, as is customary, as the tradition they followed the traditions of for a dead one. They laid her on the ground and covered her with the red shroud. Shroud means a cloth to cover a dead one. After a few hours of mourning, after mourning here means to cry because of grief. After a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. They left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. Funeral means for her cremation. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. In the evening, after making arrangements for her cremation, the writer and his family entered the room where she was lying dead on the floor, on the ground. At that time, the sun was setting and its sun rays lit her room and veranda with golden rays. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead, stiff, wrapped in red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. In these lines, the writer tells us about the love, the affection of those sparrows to whom his grandmother used to feed while she was alive. He is telling us about the relationship between those sparrows and his grandmother, that when she died, thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. There was no chirping, but those sparrows were also very unhappy on her death. They were no more chirping. We felt sorry for the birds, and my mother fetched some bread for them. His mother, the mother of the writer Khushwant Singh, fetched here means brought some pieces of some breads for them. She broke it into little crumbs. Crumbs means pieces. She broke those bread pieces into some pieces, the way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them. Them means to the sparrows. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, they flew away quietly. When they carried the corpse means dead body. When they carried the dead body of his grandmother for the cremation to go for the cremation. They flew away quietly. The all sparrows flew away from there quietly without any chirping. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. Next morning, after the cremation of his grandmother, the sweeper collected all the breadcrumbs, swept them, and put them into the dustbin. So, students, this was the remaining part which we have discussed today. Thank you. Thank you very much.